So, hello and welcome back. We are back again with a little bit more of Mr. Charles Dickens' book, A Tale of Two Cities. It didn't hook me immediately. It's definitely a little more along the lines of atmospheric, at least right now. I'm going to keep going. I mean, obviously, I'm going to keep going. This is the book that we're reading. But I think it's just suffering right now by comparison to Jules Verne. I don't know what it was about Verne's writing style, but it hooked me right away. This is a little more of a slow burn. I am curious about the mystery, what is this messenger, who is this passenger, all of those things. But yeah, that's about it. I figured I would just let Mr. Dickens know that he's got some big shoes to fill. He's got to measure up to Jules Verne. It could also just be a difference in the genre. I mean, I am more a sci-fi fantasy nerd rather than a historical fiction most of the time. Not all of the time. So, with all of that, I guess it's time for us to jump back into book the first, recalled to life, in the novel A Tale of Two Cities by Mr. Charles Dickens, beginning with chapter 3, which is called The Night Shadows. Promising title. A wonderful fact to reflect upon, that every human creature is constituted to be that profound secret and mystery to every other. A solemn consideration when I enter a great city by night, that every one of those darkly clustered houses encloses its own secret, that every room in every one of them encloses its own secret, that every beating heart in the hundreds of thousands of breasts there is, in some of its imaginings, a secret to the heart nearest to it. Something of the awfulness, even of death itself, is referable to this. No more can I turn the leaves of this dear book that I loved and vainly hope in time to read it all. No more can I look into the depths of this unfathomable water, wherein, as momentary lights glanced into it, I have had glimpses of buried treasure and other things submerged. It was appointed that the book should shut with a spring forever and forever when I had read but a page. It was appointed that the water should be locked in an eternal frost when the light was playing on its surface and I stood in ignorance on the shore. My friend is dead. My neighbor is dead. My love, the darling of my soul, is dead. It is the inexorable consolidation and perpetuation of the secret that was always in the individuality and which I shall carry in mind to my life's end. In any of the burial places of this city through which I pass, is there a sleeper more inscrutable than its busy inhabitants are, in their innermost personality to me, or that I am to them? As to this, his natural and not to be alienated inheritance, the messenger on horseback had exactly the same possessions as the king, the first minister of state, or the richest merchant in London. So, with the three passengers shut up in the narrow compass of one lumbering old mail coach, they were mysterious to one another, as complete as if each had been in his own coach and six, or his own coach and 60, with the breadth of a country between him and the next. The messenger rode back at an easy trot, stopping pretty often at alehouses along the way to drink, but evincing a tendency to keep his own counsel and to keep his hat cocked over his eyes. He had eyes that assorted very well with that decoration, being of a surface black with no depth in the color or form, and far too near together. as if they were afraid of being found out in something singly if they were kept far apart. They had a sinister expression. Under an old cocked hat like a three-cornered spittoon, and over a great muffler for chin and throat, which descended nearly to the wearer's knees. When he stopped for a drink, he moved this muffler with his left hand only, while he poured his liquor with his right, and as soon as that was done, he muffled again. "No, Jerry, no," said the messenger, harping on one theme as he rode. "I wouldn't do it for you, Jerry. Jerry, you honest tradesman, it wouldn't suit your line of business." Recalled. "Bust me if I don't think he'd been a drinkin'." His message perplexed his mind to a degree that he was fain several times to take off his hat to scratch his head. Except on the crown, which was raggedly bald, he had stiff black hair standing jaggedly all over and growing downhill almost to his broad, blunt nose. It was so like a smith's work, so much more like the top of a strongly spiked wall than a head of hair, that the best players at leapfrog might have declined him as the most dangerous man in the world to leap over. Well, he trotted back with the message that he was to deliver to the night watchman in his box at the door of Tellson's Bank by Temple Bar, who in turn was to deliver it to the greater authorities within. The shadows of the night took such shapes to him as to arouse out of the message, and took such shapes to his mare as to arouse out of her private topics of uneasiness. They seemed to be numerous, for she shied at every shadow on the road. What time the mail coach lumbered, jolted, rattled, and bumped upon its tedious way with its three fellow inscrutables inside it, to whom likewise the shadows of the night revealed themselves in the forms their dozing eyes and wandering thoughts would suggest. Tellson's Bank had a run upon it in the mail, as the bank passenger, with an arm drawn through the leathern strap, which did what lay in it to keep him from pondering against the next passenger, and driving him into his corner whenever the coach got a special jolt, as he nodded in place with half-shut eyes, the little coach windows and the coach lamp dimly glimmering through them, and the bulky bundle of the opposite passenger. They became the bank, and did a great stroke of business. The rattle of the harness was the chink of money, and more drafts were honored in 5 minutes than even Tellson's, with all its foreign and home connection, had ever paid in thrice that time. Then the strong rooms underground at Tellson's, with such of their valuable stores and secrets as were known to the passenger, and it was not a little that he knew about them, opened in front of him, and he went down into them with the great keys and the feeble burning candle, and found them safe, strong and sound and still, the way he had last seen them. But though the bank was almost always with him, and though the coach, in a confused way, like the presence of pain under an opiate, was always with him, there was another current of impression that never ceased to run all through that night. He was on his way to dig someone out of a grave. Now, which of the multitude of faces that showed themselves before him was the true face of the buried person, the shadows of the night did not indicate, but they were all faces of a man of 45 by years, and they differed principally in the passions they expressed, and in the ghastliness of their worn and wasted state. Pride, contempt, defiance, stubbornness, submission, lamentation succeeded one another, and so did their varieties of sunken cheek, cadaverous color, emaciated hands and figures, but The face was in the main one face, and every head was prematurely white. 100 times the dozing passenger asked of the spectre, "Buried how long?" And the answer was always the same: "Almost 18 years." You had abandoned all hope of being dug out? Long ago. You know you are recalled to life. They tell me so. I hope you care to live. I can't say. Shall I show her to you? Will you come and see her? The answers to this question were various and contradictory. Sometimes the broken reply was, "Wait, it would kill me if I saw her too soon." Sometimes it was given in a tender rain of tears, and then it was, "Take me to her." Sometimes it was staring and bewildered, and then the answer was, "I don't know her. I don't understand." After the imaginary discourse, the passenger in his fancy would dig and dig and dig, now with a spade, now with a great key, now with his hands, to dig this wretched creature out. Got out at last, with earth hanging about his face and hair, he would suddenly fall away to dust. The passenger would then start to himself and lower the window and get the reality of the mist and the rain upon his cheek again. Yet even when his eyes opened on the mist and rain, on the moving patch of the light from the lamps, and the hedge at the roadside retreating by jerks, the night shadows outside of the coach would fall into the train of the night shadows inside. The Real Banking House by Temple Bar, the real business of the past day, the real strong rooms, the real express sent after him, the real message returned, would all be there. Out in the midst of them, though, the ghostly face would rise, and he would accost it yet again. Buried how long? Almost 18 years. I hope you care to live. I can't say. Dig, 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 until an impatient movement from one of the two passengers would admonish him to pull up the window, draw his arms securely through the leather strap, and speculate upon the two slumbering forms until his mind lost hold of them and they again slid away into the bank and the grave. Buried how long? Almost 18 years. You had abandoned all hope of being dug out again? Long ago. The words were still in his hearing as just spoken, distinctly in his hearing as ever spoken words had been in his life, when the weary passenger started to the consciousness of daylight and found that the shadows of night were gone. He lowered the window and looked out at the rising sun. There was a ridge of plowed land, with a plow upon it where it had been left last night when the horses unyoked. Beyond, a quiet coppice wood, in which many leaves of burning red and golden yellow still remained upon the trees. Though the earth was cold and wet, the sky was clear, and the sun rose bright, placid, and beautiful. 18 years, said the passenger, looking at the sun. Gracious creator of day, to be buried alive for 18 years. And that is the end of that chapter. I still have no idea what's really going on. Hopefully he's not actually digging up a grave. That would be kind of icky. I'm going to get a drink, and we will read chapter 4 when I come back. All right, that is better. Also, The sun is shining and it looks and feels like spring outside. So when I get this uploaded, I'm going for a walk. It's probably going to be a very sloppy walk full of lots and lots of melting snow. And I know that this is not truly spring, but it's too nice of a day not to go out. This is a slightly longer chapter, so let's just get into it with Chapter 4, The Preparation. When the mail got successfully to Dover, in the course of the forenoon, the head drawer at the Royal George Hotel opened the coach door, as his custom was. He did it with some flourish of ceremony, for a mail journey from London in the winter was an achievement to congratulate an adventurous traveler on. By that time, there was only one adventurous traveler left to be congratulated, for the two others had been set down at their respective roadside destinations. The mildewy inside of the coach, with its damp and dirty straw, its disagreeable smell, and its obscurity, was kind of like a larger sort of dog kennel. Mr. Lorry, the passenger, shaking himself out of it in chains of straw, a tangle of shaggy wrapper, a flapping hat, and muddy legs, was rather like a large sort of dog. "There will be a packet to Calais tomorrow, drawer?" "Yes, sir, if the weather holds and the wind sets tolerable fair. The tide will serve pretty nicely as about 2 in the afternoon, sir. Bed, sir?" "I shall not go to bed till night, but I want a bedroom and a barber." "And then breakfast, sir?" "Yes, sir. That way, sir, if you please. Show Concord gentleman's valise and hot water to Concord. Pull off the gentleman's boots in Concord. You will find a fine sea-coal fire, sir. Fetch a barber to Concord. Stir about there now for Concord." The Concord bedchamber, being always assigned to a passenger by the mail, and passengers by the mail always heavily wrapped up from head to toe, the room had the odd interest for the establishment of the Royal George, that although but one kind of man was seen to go into it, all kinds of varieties of men came out of it. Consequently, another drawer and 2 porters and several maids and the landlady were all loitering, by accident, at various points of the road between the Concord and the coffee room, when a gentleman of 60, formerly dressed in a brown suit of clothes, pretty well worn, but quite well kept, with large square cuffs and large flaps to the pockets, passed on his way to breakfast. The coffee room had no other occupant that forenoon, other than the gentleman in brown. His breakfast table was drawn before the fire, and as he sat, with its light shining on him, waiting for the meal, he sat so very still he might have been waiting for his portrait to be done. Very orderly and methodical he looked, with a hand upon each knee, and a loud watch ticking a sonorous sermon under his flapped waistcoat, as though it pitted its gravity and longevity against the levity and evanescence of the brisk fire. He had a good leg, and was a little vain of it, for his brown stockings fitted sleek and close, and were of a fine texture. His shoes and buckles, too, though plain, were quite trim. He wore an odd little sleek clasp flaxen wing, settling very close to his head. His wig, which is to be presumed was made of hair, but which looked far more as though it were spun from filaments of silk or glass. His linen, though not of a fineness in accordance with his stockings, was as white as the tops of the waves that broke upon the neighboring beach, or the specks of sail that glinted in the sunlight far away at sea. His face, habitually suppressed and quieted, was still lighted up under the quaint wig by a pair of moist, bright eyes that must have cost their owner in years gone by some pains to drill to a composed and reserved expression of Tellson's Bank. He had a healthy color in his cheeks, and his face, though lined, bore few traces of anxiety. But perhaps the confidential bachelor clerks in Tellson's Bank were principally occupied with cares of other people, and perhaps second-hand cares, like second-hand clothes, come easily off and on. Completing his resemblance to a man who was sitting for his portrait, Mr. Lorry fell asleep. The arrival of his breakfast roused him, and he said to the drawer as he moved his chair to it, "I wish accommodation prepared for a young lady who may come here at any time today. She may ask for Mr. Jarvis Lorry, or she may only ask for a gentleman from Tellson's Bank. Please to let me know." "Yes, sir. Tellson's Bank, sir." "Yes." "Yes, sir. We have oftentimes to honor to entertain your gentlemen in their travelling backwards and forwards betwixt London and Paris, sir. A vast deal of travelling, sir, in Tellson and Company House." "Yes. We are quite a French house as well as an English one." "Yes, sir. Not much in the habit of travelling yourself, I think, sir." "Not recently. It is 15 years since I came last from France." "Indeed, sir. That was before my time here, sir. Before our people's time here, sir. The George was in other hands at that time, sir." "Yes, I believe that is correct." "But I would hold a pretty wager, sir, that a house like Tellson and Company was flourishing a matter of 50, not to speak of 15 years ago." "You might treble that, and say 150, yet not be far from the truth." "Indeed, sir." Rounding his mouth, and both of his eyes, he stepped backward from the table, and the waiter shifted his napkin from his right arm to his left, dropped into a comfortable attitude, and stood there surveying the guest while he ate and drank, as from an observatory or watchtower, just like immemorial usage of waiters from all ages. When Mr. Lorry finished his breakfast, he went out for a stroll along the beach. The little narrow, crooked town of Dover hid itself away from the beach and ran its head onto the chalk cliffs like a marine ostrich. The beach was a desert of heaps of sea and stones tumbling wildly about, and the sea did what it liked, and what the sea liked was destruction. It thundered at the town and thundered at the cliffs and brought the coast down madly. The air among the houses was of so strong a fish flavor that one might have supposed sick fish went up to be dipped in it, as sick people went down to be dipped into the sea. A little fishing was done at the port, and a quantity of strolling by night and looking seaward, particularly at those times when the tide came in and was near flood. Small tradesmen who did no business whatever sometimes unaccountably released large fortunes, and it was remarkable that nobody in the neighborhood could endure a lamplighter. As the day declined into the afternoon, and the air, which had been at intervals clear enough to allow the French coast to be seen, became charged with mist and vapor again, Mr. Lorry's thoughts clouded as well. When it was dark, and he sat before the coffee-room fire awaiting his dinner as he had awaited his breakfast, his mind was busy, digging and digging in the live red coals. A bottle of good claret after dinner does a digger in the red coals no harm at all, otherwise than it has a tendency to throw him out of his work. Mr. Lorry had been idle a long time and had just poured out his last glass of wine with as complete an appearance of satisfaction as to ever be found in an elderly gentleman of fresh complexion who has now come to the end of a bottle, when a rattling of wheels came up the narrow street and rumbled into the inn-yard. He set down his glass, untouched. "This is Mademoiselle," he said. In a few minutes the waiter came in to announce that Miss Manette had arrived from London and would be happy to see the gentleman from Tellson's. So soon. Miss Manette had taken refreshment on the road and required none right then, and was extremely anxious to see the gentleman from Tellson's immediately, if it suited his pleasure. The gentleman from Tellson's had nothing left to do but to empty his glass with an air of stolid desperation, settle his odd little flaxen wig at his ears, and follow the waiter to Miss Manette's apartment. It was a large dark room, furnished in a funeral manner, with black horsehair and loaded with heavy dark tables. These had been oiled and oiled until the two tall candles on the table in the middle of the room were gloomily reflected upon every leaf, as if they were buried in deep graves of black mahogany, and no light to speak of could be expected from them until they had been dug out. The obscurity was so hard to penetrate that Mr. Lorry, picking his way over the well-worn Turkish carpet, supposed Miss Manette to be, at least for the moment, in some other room, till he had gotten past the two tall candles and saw her standing to receive him by the table that was between them and the fire. She was a young lady of not more than 17, in a riding cloak, still holding her straw travel hat by its ribbon in her hand. As his eyes rested on a short, slight, pretty figure, with a quantity of golden hair, a pair of blue eyes that met his own with an inquiring look, and a forehead with a singular capacity of lifting and knitting itself into an expression that was not quite one of perplexity or wonder or alarm, or merely of a bright fixed attention, although it did include all four of those expressions. As his eye rested on these things, a sudden vivid likeness passed before him of a child who he had held in his arms on the passage across the very channel, one cold time, when the hail had drifted heavily and the sea was running high. That likeness passed away, like a breath along the surface of a gaunt pier glass. The frame, on the glass behind her, a hospital procession of cupids, several headless and all cripples, were offering baskets of dead sea fruit to divinities of the feminine kind. He made his formal bow. "Pray, take a seat, sir." A very clear and pleasant young voice, a bit foreign in its accent, but not too much. "I kiss your hand, madame," said Mr. Lorry. With the manners of an earlier time, he made his formal bow again, and then sat. "I received a letter from the bank, sir, yesterday, informing me that some new intelligence or discovery—" "The word is not material, miss. Either will do." "Respecting a small property of my poor father, who I had never seen, no, so long dead." Mr. Lorry moved in his chair, and he cast a troubled look towards the procession of cupids on the wall behind, as if they had any help for anyone. It said that it rendered it necessary that I should go to Paris, there to communicate with a gentleman of the bank, so good as to be dispatched to Paris for that purpose." "Myself?" "As I was prepared to hear, sir." She curtsied to him. Young ladies curtsied in those days. with a pretty desire to convey to him that she felt how much older and wiser he was than she. Mr. Lorry bowed again. I replied to the bank, sir, that as it was considered necessary by those who know and are so kind to advise me that I should go to France, and that as I am an orphan and have no friend who could go with me, I would esteem it highly if I might be permitted to place myself during this journey under that worthy gentleman's protection. The gentleman had left London, but I think a messenger was set after him to beg the favor of his waiting here for me. I am happy, said Mr. Lorry, to be entrusted with the charge. I will be more than happy to execute it. Sir, I thank you indeed. I thank you very gratefully. It was told me by the bank that the gentleman would explain to me the details of the business, and that I must prepare myself to find them of a surprising nature. I have done my best to prepare myself, and I naturally have a strong and eager interest to know what is going on. Naturally, said Mr. Lorry. Yes, After a pause, he added again, settling his crisp flaxen wig at his ears, it is very difficult to begin. He did not begin, but in his indecision he met her glance. That young forehead lifted itself into that singular expression, but it was pretty and characteristic, and she raised her hand as if with an involuntary action she caught at or stayed a passing shadow. Are you quite a stranger to me, sir? Am I not? Mr. Lorry opened his hands and extended them outward with an argumentative smile. Between the eyebrows, and just over that little feminine nose, the line of which was as delicate and fine as possible to be, her expression deepened as she took her seat thoughtfully at the chair by which she had remained standing until now. He watched her as she thought, and the moment she raised her eyes again, he went on. In your adopted country, I presume, I cannot do better than to address you as a young English lady, Miss Manette? If you please, sir. Miss Manette, I am a man of business. I have a business to charge and acquit myself of. In your reception of it, don't heed me any more than if I was a speaking machine. Truly, I am not much else. I will, with your leave, relate to you, miss, the story of one of our customers. Story? He seemed to willfully mistake the word she had repeated when he added quickly, yes, customers in the banking business. We usually call our connection our customers. He was a French gentleman, a scientific gentleman, a man of great acquirements, a doctor. Not of Beauvais? Why, yes, of Beauvais. Like Monsieur Manette, your father, the gentleman was of Beauvais. Like Monsieur Manette, your father, the gentleman was of repute in Paris. I had the honor of knowing him there. Our relations were business relations, but confidential. I was at that time in our French house, and had been, 20 years. At that time? I may ask, at what time, sir? I speak, miss, of 20 years ago. He married an English lady, and I was one of the trustees. His affairs, like the affairs of many other French gentlemen and French families, were entirely in Tellson Bank's hands. In a similar way, I am, or I have been, a trustee of one kind or another for scores of customers. These are mere business relations, miss. There is no friendship in them, no particular interest, nothing like sentiment. I have passed from one to another in the course of my business life, just as I pass from one of our customers to another in the course of my business day. In short, I have no feelings. I am merely a machine. To go on. But this is my father's story, sir, and I begin to think. Her curiously roughened forehead was intent upon him. That when I was left an orphan, through my mother's surviving my father only 2 years, that it was you who brought me to England. I'm almost sure it was you. Mr. Lorry took the hesitating little hand that confidingly advanced to take his, and he put it with ceremony to his lips. He then conducted the young lady straightway to her chair again, and holding the chair back with his left hand, and using his right by turns to rub at his chin, pull at his wig and ears, or point what he said, he stood looking into her face, and she sat looking into his. Miss Manette, it was I. And you will see how truly I spoke of myself just now in saying I had no feelings, and that all the relations I hold with my fellow creatures are mere business relations when you reflect that I have never seen you since. No, you have been the ward of Tellson's house since, and I have been busy with other business of Tellson's house since then. Feelings! I have no time for them, no chance of them. I pass my whole life, miss, in turning an immense pecuniary mangle. After this odd description of his daily routine of employment, Mr. Lorry flattened his fat flaxen wig upon his head with both hands, which was totally unnecessary, for nothing could be flatter than its shining surface, and he resumed his former attitude. So far, miss, as you have remarked, this is the story of your regretted father. Now comes the difference. If your father had not died when he did, don't be frightened. How should I start? She jumped, and she caught his wrist with both of her hands. Pray, said Mr. Lorry in a soothing tone, bringing his left hand from the back of the chair to lay it upon her fingers that were clasping him with such a violent tremble. Pray control your agitation. This is a matter of business, as I was saying. Her look so discomposed him that he stopped, wandered a bit, and then began anew. As I was saying, if Monsieur Manette had not died, if he had suddenly and silently disappeared, if he had been spirited away, if it had not been difficult to guess to what dreadful place, though no art could trace him, if he had an enemy and some compatriot who could exercise a privilege that I in my own time have known the boldest people afraid to speak of in a whisper across the water. For instance, the privilege of filling up bank forms for the consignment of any one to the oblivion of a prison for any length of time. If his wife had implored the king, the queen, the court, the clergy for any tidings of him, all quite in vain, then the history of your father would have been the history of this unfortunate gentleman, the Doctor of Beauvais. I beg you tell me more, sir. I will. I am. Can you bear it? I can bear anything but the uncertainty that you leave me in at this moment. You speak collectedly, and you are collected. That is good. Though his manner made him seem less satisfied than his words. A matter of business. Regard this as a matter of business that must be done. Now, if this doctor's wife, though a lady of great courage and spirit, had suffered so intensely from this cause before her child was born. Was the little child a daughter, sir? A daughter. A matter of business. Don't be distressed, miss. If the poor lady had suffered so intensely before her little child was born that she came to the determination of sparing the poor child the inheritance of any part of the agony she had known the pains of, by raising this child in the belief that her father was dead. No, no, don't kneel, in heaven's name. Why are you kneeling to me?
For the truth. Oh, dear, good, compassionate sir, for the truth.
This is a matter of business. You confuse me, and how can I transact business if I am confused? Let us be clear-headed. If you could kindly mention now, for instance, what 9 times 9 pence is, or how many shillings to 20 guinea, it would be ever so encouraging. I would be much more at ease about your state of mind if you could do that. Without directly answering his appeal, she sat so still when he had gently raised her, and the hands that had not ceased to clasp his wrists were so much more steady than they had been, that this communicated a bit of reassurance to Mr. Lorry. That's good. Courage! Business! You have business before you. Useful business, Miss Manette. Your mother took this course with you, and when she died, I believe of a broken heart, having never slackened her unavailing search for your father, she left you at 2 years old to grow to be blooming, beautiful, and happy, without the dark cloud upon you of living in uncertainty whether your father soon wore his heart out in prison or wasted away there through many lingering years. As he said these words, he looked down with an admiring pity upon the flowing golden hair, as if he pictured himself that it might have already been tinged with gray. You know your parents had no great possession, and what they had was secured to your mother and you. There has been no new discovery of money or any other property, but he felt his wrist held closer, and he stopped. The expression on her forehead, which had so particularly attracted his notice, and which was now immovable, had been deepened to one of pain and horror. But he has been found. He is alive, greatly changed, it is probable, almost a wreck, it's possible, though we will hope for the best. But he is still alive. Your father has been taken to the house of an old servant in Paris, and we are going there. I, to identify him if I can. You, to restore him to life, love, duty, rest, and comfort. A shiver ran through her body, and from hers to his, and she said, in a low, awe-stricken voice, as if she were saying it in a dream,
I am going to see his ghost. It will be his ghost, not him.
Mr. Lorry quietly rubbed the hands that held his arm. There, there. See now, see now. The best and worst are known to you now. You are well on your way to the poor wronged gentleman, and with a fair sea voyage and a fair land journey, you will soon be at his dearest side. She said again, in the same tone, down to a whisper,
I have been free. I have been happy, yet his ghost has never haunted me.
Only one thing more, said Mr. Lorry, laying stress upon it as a wholesome means of catching her attention. He has been found under another name, his own long forgotten or long hidden. It would be worse than useless now to inquire which, worse than useless to seek to know whether he has been for years overlooked or always been designedly a held prisoner. It would be worse than useless now to make any inquiries, because it would be dangerous. Better not to mention the subject anywhere or in any way, and to remove him, for a while at all events, from France. Even I, safe as an Englishman, and even Tellson's as important as they are to French credit, avoid all naming of this matter. I carry about me not a scrap of writing openly referring to it. This is a secret service altogether. My credentials, entreaties, and memoranda are all comprehended in the one line, recalled to life, which may mean anything. But what is the matter? She's not paying any attention. Miss Manette! Perfectly still and silent, and not even fallen back in her chair, she was sitting under his hand, utterly insensible, with her eyes open and fixed on him, and with that last expression looking as though it were carved or branded into her forehead. So close was her hold upon his arm that he feared to detach himself, lest it hurt her. Therefore he called out loudly for assistance without moving. A wild-looking woman, who, even in his agitation, Mr. Lorry observed to be completely of a red color, and to have red hair, and to be dressed in some extraordinarily tight-fitting fashion, and to have upon her head a most wonderful bonnet, like a grenadier wooden measure, and a good measure too, or maybe like a great Stilton cheese, came running into the room in advance of the inn servants, and soon settled the question of his detachment from the poor young lady by laying a brawny hand upon his chest and sending him flying against the nearest wall. I really think she must be a man, was Mr. Lorry's breathless thought, simultaneously as he hit the wall. Why, look at you all, bawled this figure, addressing the inn servants. Why don't you go and fetch things instead of standing there staring at me? I'm not so much to look at, am I? Why don't you go and fetch things? I'll let you know if you don't bring smelling salts, cold water, vinegar, and things like that quickly. I will let you know. There was an immediate dispersal for these restoratives, and she softly laid the patient upon the sofa and tended to her with great skill and gentleness, calling her my precious and my bird, and spreading her golden hair aside over her shoulders with pride and care. And you in brown, she said indignantly, turning to Mr. Lorry. Couldn't you tell her what you had to tell her without frightening her to death? Look at her, her pretty face and her cold as hands. Do you call that being a banker? Mr. Lorry was so exceedingly disconcerted by a question so hard to answer that he could only look on at a distance with much feebler sympathy and humility, while this strong woman, having banished the inn servants under the mysterious penalty of letting them know, something not mentioned if they stayed there, she recovered her charge by a regular series of graduation, and coaxed her to lay her drooping head upon this woman's shoulder. I hope she will do all right now, said Mr. Lorry. No thanks to you in brown if she does. Oh, my poor pretty. I hope, said Mr. Lorry, after another pause of feeble sympathy and humility, I hope that you will accompany Miss Manette to France. A likely thing, said the strong woman. If it was ever intended that I should go across salt water, do you suppose Providence would have cast my lot on an island? And this being a hard question to answer, Mr. Lorry went back to his room to think on it. And that was the end of chapter 4, which was quite the long chapter, and at least now we know what we're doing, evidently. We're not digging up a corpse. That's good. We're just digging up a prisoner. And it's a prisoner that has something secret going on with it, so I guess we'll just have to wait and see. That was better. I'm more interested now than I was after the first 2 chapters. So good on you, Mr. Dickens. You don't need that many words, though. He definitely is suffering from the see how not incomprehensible, because I'm comprehending everything fine. Just see how wordy we could make something. Maybe that was the difference between him and Jules Verne. Jules Verne was much more straight to the point, using, I guess, common language, or maybe tone of writing was more familiar. This is more hoity-toity. Is hoity-toity a good word? It might be. Anyway, the sun is shining and I can't wait to get out and feel something that is not icy cold wind and snow. So I'm going to upload this. Thank you for listening. Please do hit the thumbs up on your way out, and I will see you next time.